Hi, beautiful ones. My intention with the Shamangelic Healing podcast is to be a platform that explores real-life issues and provides you with valuable insights and practical tools to support you on your journey of healing core wounds and reclaiming your power and manifesting a thriving, impactful life that you absolutely love. You see, it's my dream to inspire millions to shine. So if you find these topics valuable, please take a moment and share the podcast and leave us a rave review. This helps the podcast grow and reach the people that would greatly benefit from these insights. Thank you so much for tuning in and investing in your personal development. I'm right here walking this journey with you. So let's dive into this episode. Welcome to the Shamangelic Healing podcast. We are diving in today about betrayal and accountability, and my guest, who is a dear soul sister, of course, Dr. Danielle McGinnis. And, her background is initially in the physiology, and her real passion now, as she's getting her PhD in psychology, is really around the spiritual body, the energy body, the emotional body, and making the unconscious conscious, which is also my jam. And this is why we get along so well. And so grateful for the work that you're doing, the bridge between not only the unconscious to the conscious, but also, where emotional and energy are trapped in the body, and that bridge between like using the body as a diagnostic and the consciousness as a diagnostic, and the emotional imprints, and how those, intersect. And so excited to dive deep with you today. And we've known each other for a little while because you've come and done some work here with me in Sedona. And so welcome, sister. I love you, and I'm grateful to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful intro, by the way. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation. As you know, like, my path over the last few years has been anything but straight and linear. It's been messy, but in it, I have just found so much of myself and reclaimed a lot of, really been able to stay with those wounds that were really plaguing me for a long time. And so the work that I do now is really about bridging the science, where my roots are, with the sacred. And I feel like that overlap is where a lot of people find themselves in the pits of suffering. And so it's a blessing to be able to serve in this way. So thank you for giving me the chance to talk about myself on your platform. I'm just so blessed.
Absolutely. And I've watched you because, we met a few years back here in Sedona for the Empowerment and Awakening weekend. I have watched you head first go into shadow work, accountability, like really looking at your patterns, your part. And this is why that is such a perfect fit for you to really be taking your own awareness into psychology and supporting other people through the process of what you're going through. And what I'm going through and what everybody else is going through is waking up. And I've just watched your tenacity with radical accountability. As much as it's uncomfortable and difficult, it's also so liberating. I've watched your growth, I've watched your expansion, and how you've shifted your energy and your passions and your purpose, and your power and your confidence, and your life and the different parts of your life are really so deeply aligning with who you are. And so I just want to acknowledge first of that, because it's beautiful to watch.
Thank you so much. And I feel like I went through a lot of my life being the performer and using force to get what I wanted. And now the past few years of my life have been centered around surrender.
Yes.
Like, how can I be more myself if I can also just let go of the need to be X, Y, Z, whatever I think I should be? And so the transformation really has been kind of giving it to God, or giving it to universe, or giving it to spirit, because I think I did my best to kind of run myself into all of the walls that were keeping me stuck. And I realized I can't use force anymore. It's
No.
got to be grace and surrender. And yeah.
It feels like the feminine is coming in a lot more to make decisions, to heal things, but also to find the path. That is more of the feminine qualities of listening and honoring versus force and pushing. And that doesn't mean we don't still take action, but it's action in a more of aligned way. And so with that, the topic we're really wanting to get juicy about today is betrayal. And how many forms that takes to self-betrayal or relationship betrayal, or so when you hear the word betrayal, what's the first thing that comes up for you?
A sensation in my gut. It's almost like your stomach drops. And I could have never said that 2 years ago because I was so disconnected from my body. But I feel what betrayal has been in my life. And I love that I feel that sensation because it's a reminder to like ground, find your center before you go into like all of these fear, panic stories, all the things where it's like, okay, it's a reminder that there is some wisdom sitting in that. So that's where I go.
I love that you're connecting a feeling to a sensation in the body. And, so many of us are disassociated with our body, our physical body pains that are communicating something's betraying, listening to the body, like betrayal of that responsibility for taking care of the body. And I love that you're saying betrayal is a gut feeling. It's this thing, right? I could just feel that in the solar plexus, like, ugh, because it's a surprise. Usually betrayal, we think of betrayal as we're not expecting it, and it's not what we wanted necessarily. So once you get at when you're saying betrayal is a physical sensation, what betrayal dynamics have you met? Like what are the ones that have really, been important in your life? What betrayals have been pivotal, impactful?
Well, I think as the way that we immediately orient to the world is through other. And so the ways in which I saw I was betraying myself was actually through a mirror of other. And so I was able to see the ways in which I self-betrayed by looking at a relationship betrayal. And then as I was with that and really, I would call it alchemizing that because I feel like I put it in a cauldron and I was like, okay, so let's get through this. Let's transform this into wisdom. So as I was alchemizing that, I feel like I've realized why I self-betrayed to end up in betrayal. And it comes down to feeling a little bit betrayed by some caregivers and not knowing what to do with that. And so I just didn't do anything with it. I like put it in the back seat and I was like, okay, well, I'll just force my way through life. And so for me, the outer betrayal was the first thing that I witnessed because there is this sense of like when you're so disconnected from your truth, when you see somebody do something so awful, you're like, oh my gosh, how could you do this to me? Like you almost prop yourself up and don't recognize the ways in which you have contributed to that. And I think that the pain and the fear of actually facing the things within myself was the hardest part of seeing the betrayal and from other.
So a couple things here. We're getting right into the juicy parts of it because a lot of times the first betrayal that we will feel is from family, or in your case, you used caregiver, anybody that is responsible for our safety, for our care, for our loving, for our support. And so what I'm hearing is some of the first betrayal that we might have experienced, those listening, watching, might have been from childhood, where we felt betrayed by a mother, a father. Maybe there was adoption, maybe there was abandonment, maybe there was just neglect or not feeling validated, loved, safe or protected. So, and that is something that we might not be able to access our own accountability around that, at least at that stage in life, because we're 2 or 5 or 6, and we're not aware of our participation in any of that. And, caregivers are responsible for us. And so how do you, that may be the first betrayal. We're going to get into relationship betrayal in a second, because that's juicy for a lot of us, have felt that in relationship betrayal as other. But what is a healing approach that we can take when you feel betrayed as a child, where you can't really source back to your own accountability there?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I feel like it feels like abandonment. It wasn't necessarily exactly abandonment, but I was trusting these people that I projected the image of God onto to always be there for me. And then out of nowhere, I get this massive conversation about divorce, and I feel completely betrayed. I'm like, wait, what? Like, this perfect family I see is like not perfect. And as a 10-year-old, you don't have the tools to work through that. A lot of parents didn't have emotional language to help their kids through that. And so when there's it's different when you see or you witness a lot of conflict in your household, or maybe some toxicity in the relationship. But for me, there was nothing. There was no fighting. There was nothing that really led me to think that this was going to go away. And so I felt very betrayed by both of my parents at that time. And then after the divorce kind of went through, it was more of I was trusting that my parents would still be there for me. And I felt kind of alone, like very alone, actually. So really, what approach I take to that is not abandoning that child like she was abandoned in the past. And that means spending time with her. And that's very sensitive and tender, because for me, what I learned to do was I learned to cut myself off from my emotions and be a performer. I learned to be a good student. I learned to be a good athlete. And that was the way in which I would receive love. But I really wasn't feeling anything at that time. And so to go back and do inner child work with a child who was cut off from her emotions, teaching her that her wounds are safe with me. And that takes a lot of work, present moment, for me to be able to be in the face of my own emotional experiences and ground myself in the truth of I'm safe and I am nurtured and I'm held. But oftentimes when those pangs from her come forward, we leave and we abandon her, just like we were abandoned when we were younger. And so I really, in my work, I help people stay.
Yeah.
And really, it's not about doing much about it. It's really about staying and providing this beautiful soil that's nurturing for this inner child, so she or he feels safe to come forward into the present moment with you.
Yeah, this is the reparenting. I love that you brought this up, because this is, as a coping mechanism, as a little boy or a little girl, we may go into our own betrayal of our emotions, like you said, and the compensator, your way of compensating was I'll perform. Some people become pleasers. Some people abandon their own needs and start caregiving to mother or father, or playing the psychologist or the peacekeeper or the caregiver when they're actually the one needing the care. And so this is where the beginning of self-betrayal comes in, to abandon our own needs or our own authenticity in order to overcompensate. And I appreciate that you brought that up, because then that creates these other patterns where we abandon self in order to get love, to feel worthy because we didn't, or feel safe. So So that is absolutely staying and looking at the inner child and what do they need now, even though the caregivers betrayed what we would expect, our expectations of that this is what they should have provided. And then there's a gap between what we expected them to provide or wanted them to provide and what they actually provided. And then as adults, we get to navigate that gap.
Yeah. And you watched me pull back because oftentimes we keep these projections of our parents as these God images, whether we consciously know it or not, these unconscious projections onto our parents. And then what that does is it keeps us in the realm of other. So it keeps us floating outside of ourselves. So what I had to do was pull back that projection and say, like, no, Danielle, you're an adult and you have to be there for yourself. It's not your mom's job to do that for you anymore. And so every time I would get kind of up in arms about her, that was only a way to keep me more separated from me. And so bringing back my own ability to be my own parent and not being bitter, cynical, resentful, that was tough. That was really, really painful.
Growing up. You're
Yeah.
growing up. And this is what one of the things that we were going through was just a process of radical accountability of like, wait, is it your mother's responsibility to continue to do this when you're a grown adult? So this is, I think, what you're describing, another form of betrayal is not taking accountability for, oh, wait, I'm a grown woman, or this isn't their responsibility anymore. And we can kind of betray our own age and our own path by, giving that power away to another person because the old pattern is still playing. Like, wait a second, I've got to break this pattern and take accountability for my finances or my health or my life because it's not their responsibility anymore.
Or the choices too, the choices that we make. Like for me, it felt like there was always just this numinosity of my mother's opinion of things in my life. And it was like, no, if I care more about what my mom says about me than a stranger on the street that is her same age, I've got some work to do around that if I'm an adult. Like I really need to start like cutting that numinosity down and allowing her to live her life too.
Yes.
So I'm not constantly projecting onto her.
Right, because then that's another betrayal that doesn't allow her to be human.
Right.
Or a father to be human or a partner to be human, because that's another betrayal of not honoring where somebody actually is and taking accountability for that, their humanness, and like accepting their humanness and shift that pedestal of perfection or that expectation of perfection that also disempowers us from taking control of our lives.
Yeah. So I think the hardest thing in that whole process was, there is the truth that our parents do the best that they can. And this is a big one for me. And there are times in which they didn't show up for you when you needed it. And like that, recognizing that took this healing for me from a concept to say, like, they did the best that they could, grace, love, compassion, into also you're hurting. Yeah. Recognize that you're hurting. I can hold both of those at the same time and be okay. And I think that I thought that if I said that they didn't show up for me, I would make it turn into something evil, like we would never speak again, or I would just look at them that way the rest of my life. But it was just energy that I needed to like work through my system and be with the hurt.
Yeah, honesty. Okay, they did not show up in this way, or they didn't protect me, or whatever the reality piece is, because then that piece, when we're honest about it, yes, they did their best and there's a gap here, then that gives us the opportunity for forgiveness in that place, for their humanness. And it's not bypassing the fact that I still really felt hurt, or I feel neglected, or I got traumatized, or I was injured somehow in their humanness. what I'm hearing is that it's really important to show up for that inner child and let them be mad, let them be sad, and go to the wounds and the healing. So we're not just bypassing of like, oh yeah, mom and dad did the best they can, and then in doing so we're betraying the real emotions that allow that part of us that is wounded to heal. As a free gift, we'll give a free guided visualization for healing the inner child wounds. So, look for that, because that's important. And the other piece that you're addressing is having some clear boundaries between whether it's a parent and self, or a sibling and self, a coworker, a boss, or a partner and self, of recognizing, wait, where am I projecting accountability for my stuff, for of what I'm actually accountable? Where am I projecting that onto a partner or to somebody else? And so back to like clear boundaries and adulting.
Yeah. Boundaries are so important. And oftentimes, like in my particular childhood experience, there wasn't a lot of conversation about things. So my strategy was just to become the chameleon. I became the performer. I became the athlete because that's what my parents wanted me to be. So there was no boundary between who they wanted me to be and who I actually was. And so I just like got all of this inner world very mixed up at that time. So really pulling that back and starting to, I mean, your ego loves to have things kind of sorted out and in categories. So just putting my head down and doing the work around what's mine and what's theirs. Whose voice is that? That's not mine. And just really getting clear around that.
This sounds like, where inner betrayal, personal betrayal, self-betrayal happens when it's like, I'm going to abandon myself to get their approval, to be the achiever so that I get attention. If it's not from them, I'll get it from a coach, I'll get it from my peers, but I'm abandoning self in order to do that. So we're looking at the motivation behind your decisions, and is it coming from a place where you're abandoning self and betraying self? Because like you said earlier, it's gonna, like when you are dealing with betrayal, when you follow the thread back, every single time there's going to be a self-betrayal somewhere in there as part of that experience.
And mine's rooted in a lot of overwhelm. So there was a lot of like newness and like going different places and not knowing where I was going to be, and like just very overwhelming. And so as a child growing up, I just figured, okay, well, I've convinced myself that I have control over this, and I control it via these behaviors. And so that control was the way in which I was self-betraying, because I wasn't acknowledging the overwhelm actually had a message for me to say like, hey, something's not aligned. It was actually, I was trying to control so much, and I was so focused that I had the illusion that I did have the control, and that was keeping me away from the ways I was addicted to that control.
Right, which doesn't allow you to see your part in
blinded,
ignoring codependency, or ignoring, I'm not listening to my intuition, or ignoring emotions or clues the universe is trying to say, shift this, change this, it needs attention. So it's a fabulous, crafty little coping mechanism that we use to avoid accountability and bypass the real issue by making it about somebody else or blaming somebody, and continuing to perpetuate overwhelm, the pattern. So how do you deal with that now? What has changed in your process when you get to overwhelm? What's different now, or what are you still implementing now?
I would say that my sensitivity, like I can notice now when I'm starting to feel overwhelmed versus just being constantly in overwhelm and doing all of these things to keep myself from feeling it. So I'm actually feeling my feelings, feeling my emotions. And then typically what I do with my emotions, because I used my head for so much of my life, it's not about like, well, why am I feeling this way? It's more about what is happening inside of my body? Can I notice what's happening? Can I locate where it is? And then just try to like at least give it a label as best as we can. And what that does is it gives your ego a little bit of safety and knowing that, oh, okay, so we've experienced this before because we know that we've labeled this as that. So we can move through it. And then I also remind myself, I don't leave when I experience emotions. I stay grounded and I remind myself that this too shall pass. Like it's an energetic, it's giving me information about my surroundings. And so if I can't face the truth of that reality, that's work that I have to do. In like a good example of this is that I did a webinar, I don't know, probably a month ago, and I was feeling so anxious before this webinar, like incredibly anxious. And I recognized it because anxiety and fear kind of feel the same, but fear informs us. It's like, oh, you want to run or you want to fight. But anxiety just kind of keeps us stuck. Like it does not inform us, it paralyzes us. And so I'm like, okay, how can I lift up this anxiety and realize underneath that there's a fear of being humiliated or shutting down or like whatever. So I'm really starting to be a friend with my emotions. My emotions are, they have my back. You know, they're the wisdom that is giving us information. And so that's the way in which I work with this overwhelm is just to, I think the way that we need to work with it is a little bit more creative than probably what we think. So we immediately jump to why. Like, why are we feeling overwhelmed? And that will just take you into like thought spirals. But you can't have the why until you feel the what with emotions. And so I think just being with that is good because I've cut my heart off for most of my life. So now I allow my heart to kind of be the front and center. And then my mind then comes in and says, okay, we've got this.
Yeah.
You're fine.
I appreciate that you're really saying stay put with the emotions when they rise. Give them a voice, give them a space, a safe space where there's not judgment, where you're not rushing it, and to just let the vent happening. You know, whether it's fiery emotions like rage or anger, or if it is watery emotions like sadness or grief, and to just or frustration, and just to let the emotions move and then go into the why, because the emotions are so intelligent. Like when I'm resentful or when that usually means that I'm not having clear boundaries or I'm having unrealistic expectations. You know, when I'm in this place of frustration, it's usually because something's not in alignment. You know, a thing that used to work isn't working any longer, or something's expired and I'm still staying with it, or the environment has changed and I need to shift accordingly, whether it's my lifestyle or whether it's a business thing or whatever it is. And like all of that has, instead of betraying the emotions that are actually going to give us the clue about how to fix it or how to stop the pattern, or how to take accountability so that we change, we make a different choice next time. So let's talk a little bit. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, I believe that our psyches are self-regulating, meaning that our unconscious is going to compensate any way in which we have become one-sided. And so if we've become one-sided with our heads, now our emotions in our body become the enemy because it doesn't feel safe. It's a threat to all of this convincing, the illusion that we've created in our heads. And anytime that our heart is cut off from our head, we just kind of spiritual bypass and we're like, everything's fine when it's not.
Right.
So I think that emotions are helping the psyche regulate itself because I do feel like the psyche knows our potential and it knows our tolerance. And so if we're overdoing our tolerance, we're going to get feedback. And if we're not stepping into our potential, we're going to get feedback. And so thinking of emotions as that feedback is a game changer. It's a game changer.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. It just, especially for most men, don't feel, don't cry, don't talk about it, where emotions are like more the watery emotions oppressed. In women, a lot of the fierier emotions are oppressed. Don't get angry, don't get rageful, don't speak out, don't swear. And actually there's emotional intelligence if we just allow ourselves to get curious about what the emotions are knocking on the door trying to get us to pay attention to. So let's talk a little bit about relationship betrayal, where there's been an infidelity or a lie or a deception of some kind. And what do you think's going on there?
I think it's a mirror. I think it's a mirror. And I think that we, again, have convinced ourselves that the problem is them and the problem is not us, that we have not contributed to that. And I think that it's a mirror for us to see how we are not listening, tuning in, surrendering. And I would say from my experience, and I don't know if this is true for all betrayals, but in my experience, that betrayal was a mirror to the ways in which I was trying to control the relationship and make it something that it wasn't, instead of allowing it to organically unfold and perhaps end. But my control was forcing it into a way where it ended. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to hold on to this and actually just stay in this, when it was clearly telling me that's not the healthy thing to do.
So this is like a betrayal of the truth, of like the reality check. This relationship isn't in alignment and I'm ignoring that. That's a betrayal right there. So of course it's going to lead in infidelity or some betrayal, some trauma, some pain for sure, some chaos for sure. So I heard a couple things there. One is like I'm I'm not being honest about the reality of the situation. And I'm trying to control it. And I think the other one is like that it's a mirror, that it's a reflection, because if I don't value and respect myself, I will attract somebody that also mirrors that back to me. So it's a vibrational match, right?
And it's interesting because healing that has been very nuanced to kind of separate about like, was this all my fault? Is it me? Very like shame-based, like I'm the problem, right? When it's like, yes, you did contribute to it, but there was also another dynamic in there too. And I think the ways in which some of the healing around my own betrayal was not giving myself permission to say I was doing the best that I could at that time. I didn't have a lot of personal development, relational skills. And so just leaving myself out there to say, like, you screwed up and just like blaming myself, that was tough. So I had to like work through that and be very compassionate with myself, forgiving of self and other for all of the ways in which I showed up. So yeah, it's very nuanced because it's personal responsibility and also being very compassionate with yourself.
Because we can go on two sides of that. One, we could be such the martyr that we take all responsibility without honoring that the other person had a part. And so that's another form of betrayal, is taking ownership for what we didn't create. And to just recognize that, okay, yeah, they made mistakes too. They have their own insecurities, they have their own fears, they're not working from a full deck, we're not working from a full deck. And back to what we were saying earlier about the forgiveness that the inner child, that we have about the caregiver, that where there's a gap between how we wanted a person to show up and the way they showed up, is that in this we get to pull out the part that says, wait a second, my part might have been I ignored red flags. My part might have been I ignored intuition, or I didn't say no, or I wasn't honest, or I didn't communicate my values, my priorities, or I knew that this wasn't right and I said yes anyway. And so not that ever happens to anyone ever. I can tell you lots of different stories where, what this woman's like, he has this one client, he's like, he has a whole other family, a whole other wife and a whole other family. And so I'm like, let's dial it back. Let's go back. When was the first time that you didn't feel something was right? Well, he was hitting on my sister on our first date. When he came to pick me up, he was hitting on my sister on our first date. There you go. There's self-betrayal. It will lead for sure to a bigger betrayal. And so I think there's one betrayal of like not listening to the red flags, not listening. That's where we can take accountability on our part to say, you know what? Yeah. And forgiveness that says, hey, maybe my insecurity, maybe I wasn't, all of those other reasons where I'm still human. I want to be able to forgive myself, but still take accountability, but not bully myself. But the other part is look, I'm not responsible for their lies. I'm not responsible for their choices. And I can be angry and mad. And the next move there is, how can I forgive them? That doesn't mean I'm going to stay with them, but how can I come to forgiveness, recognizing they're doing the best they can? And what am I learning as far as a lesson so that I don't keep attracting the same situation over and over again? Not that either of us have ever done that. Right.
Yeah. And I think that's really the test, right? Is like the universe is going to serve us the same lessons over and over again until we integrate the truth. And so a lot of my problem in that personal relationship was facing the reality of the situation and how much that hurt. Yes. And trying not to play God and not be like, oh, well, if I just change this thing about the reality, then it'll feel better. And then it didn't. And I was like, well, maybe if I change this thing, it'll feel better. And then it didn't. And then it just got to a point where I was completely broken open. And that was the place in which I was like, thy will be done.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes the pattern repeating over and over, the infidelity. Oh, he cheated again, or like lie, or the pattern repeating over and over. Sometimes we can't see it the first time, even though it's right in our face, because, well, that means he doesn't love me, or I'm unlovable. Then we have to face the reality of that this relationship is going to end. And sometimes there's another part of us, that little child that doesn't want to be left, that is like, I will stay for breadcrumbs rather than advocate for self-respect and safety and a healthy relationship. So often, if those other betrayals and the wounds aren't healed, then we'll stay in something just to have something rather than nothing, because the fear of being alone, or the fear of being rejected, or the fear of them being with somebody else, will betray self and just settle for breadcrumbs, or allow somebody that is not choosing us to stay in our lives, or where we want different things, but we don't want to lose them. So we'll betray our truth. It says, you know what, I really don't want to be in an open relationship, but I don't want to lose them. So
so we stay in things that are so painful because the pain becomes more familiar than the actual other emotions. And oftentimes when we get kind of stuck in those situations, I believe that ultimately we know what to do. Like, we know exactly what we need to do, but it hurts so bad, or we're so afraid to do it, that what we need in that moment is extreme radical faith.
Yeah.
Like the faith that, like, I am doing what is best for me. And even though it hurts, and even though it's unfamiliar, this is it. I'm surrendering to this.
It takes radical courage, and I just invite anybody listening and watching that is really feeling this to hear it this time.
Yeah. It says,
something's not quite right, whether it's in your relationships, whether it's in your career, whether it's in your health. If something isn't quite right, back to intuition, then it's probably not quite right. and the courage to be honest about that and get whatever support you need, because you might not have the support system around to help you navigate it. Like if you're in an abusive relationship, sometimes, or in an unconscious relationship with yourself, or an eating disorder where you're betraying your own body, whatever it is, like have the courage also to reach out for whatever help you need, so that you're not feeling like you're navigating this on your own, because sometimes we don't have the tools or the strength or the courage, and we need a little help. And like that, don't feel ashamed about that, because sometimes we just don't have the tools to leave an unhealthy relationship or relieve a relationship with substance abuse. And so, like, I love that you're saying faith, and then I would add to that courage, and get the support that you need so that you can navigate this.
It's the classic, like, give me the strength to accept the things that I cannot change, and courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So it really is about courage, acceptance, and discernment and wisdom to know what is yours and what is somebody else's. And that the moment that we say, like, no more, no more, it is done. I am done with this. This is my present moment, and I am choosing to act upon what the present moment is telling me, not just a bunch of past wounding patterns, but the present moment. And then also taking into account, like, the betterment of your future, like that. It's a game changer, because then you get filled with spirit, because you're actually co-creating with spirit. You're like saying, like, yes, I trust this. I don't know what's going to happen, but I trust. And often, I feel like oftentimes the reason why we get addicted to things is because we're using that to avoid the pain and the inner truth.
And the growth too.
Yeah. And it's kind of like when you get to this point and you're like, I don't know what to do. And you ask somebody because a lot of times in the rock bottoms, you're like, just help, like, somebody help me, because you feel very weak. But the worst thing that you could do in that moment is ask for help, but then don't listen. Like, don't keep your ears open, because I did that a lot, where I would, like, hire coaches, hire mentors, do the therapy, and then I just, like, wasn't listening. I wasn't ready to listen. And so I think everything has divine timing. So I don't judge myself for that. But I think I was just I was growing enough courage internally and ego strength to actually step away, because the leaving is often harder than the staying, I think.
For sure. And it's unfamiliar. And I appreciate that you're saying divine timing, because sometimes the pattern, before you get rock bottom, before you're ready to say enough, whether it's with a substance, that was like with me and alcohol. It wasn't the first time that I got drunk and passed out that I was like, oh, this isn't working for me. It took me a lot of times, a lot of hitting my head against the wall, and continue to try that, me and alcohol really get along, and we don't do well. And it took me years to figure out, okay, done, and the courage. And sometimes it takes, and we get to have grace with ourselves and compassion with ourselves as we're gaining the strength and the courage to break up with something, whether it's an old pattern, a belief, a relationship dynamic, a substance, an addiction, whatever it is that is not in alignment, so that we're not betraying ourselves any longer. And sometimes it takes courage and strength and time to cultivate that level of self-respect and faith. And I a lot of people I hear in my healing practice that are bullying themselves for not making that step earlier, not leaving the relationship earlier, not letting go of alcohol earlier. And it's just like, and some grace there, I think, is necessary. And it is going to take courage. That's why I think it's a support system is important. To help sometimes through the process. And sometimes we'll hear advice and we're not ready to take it because we're not ready to act yet. But it's a little drop in the bucket. It's another little drop in the bucket. And
yep.
I wasn't able to leave. I wasn't ready to leave my marriage until like one final straw. And I was like, okay, 100%. If that's happening, I'm out. And it was like so clear. There was no, okay, well, maybe. It was just no, like
Same.
self-respect came in, and I was like, will not absolutely tolerate this anymore, non-negotiable. And I just, it was so clear. Same with me and alcohol. It was just like, okay, I finally get it. We're breaking up. And there was no going back. When you hit that point where you're totally clear, there usually isn't this kind of, maybe we'll get back together. Maybe. It's just so clear.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like it takes just so much suffering to get to that point. If we're not tuned in to, you know, the divine guidance or our intuition, it just takes so much suffering. But it's not breaking you. It really is breaking you open.
Yes.
It's not breaking you in half. And I think that like on the way, like, you know, when you're on the way down, you feel it. Like you're on the descent and you're like, I'm broken. I'm feeling like just really shreds of you. But like when you hit the bottom, it's like, man, it's
Right. And then
beautiful.
it is. And then from that you can rebuild. Like when you, if in that place you don't betray and bypass,
Mm-hmm.
and you actually take accountability. How did I get here? What lessons am I learning? What do I need to change? And if you go into that place, that's my, what I call marital liberation instead of a divorce. And so my marital liberation like catalyzed healing, it, like reclaiming my health, spirituality, like cleansing, fasting, and it set me on my path, my soul path. Like it woke me up. It cracked me open. I was absolutely rock bottom, and I was, and had twins that were 3 years old. So I was like, I better get my shit together fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a powerful time, and our ego fears the pain of rock bottom, but our soul knows that there's liberation on the other side, because there's treasures in that place where everything that's not in alignment starts cracking and everything that's a lie starts being seen. And that's where real empowerment, like what you were saying about bringing the unconscious conscious, that's the bridge to real healing and empowerment, which I think is so exciting.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that kind of came forward into my lens when I hit my rock bottom was that my choices matter. Every single choice I make, like before I was just kind of going through the motions and thinking that these tiny little ways in which I was showing up didn't matter, but it does. Like the energy that you put forward into whatever you're doing, whether it's a relationship or if you're putting energy into fear, like the consequence of that is going to be matched with that energy. And I realized that like the energy I was putting into this situation was just so toxic.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to see the ways in which I needed to change that. And you know, for me, like I kind of did like a radical, like, I think again, divine timing, right? So like it was like right at a moment when I was separating distance. So I was leaving that person in another place, and I was assigned for physical therapy school to be in a different place. And I think that it was perfect timing. I was terrified. It was Christmas. I went to Christmas Eve mass with my mom, and I walk into the church, which I hadn't been in since maybe I was like 12 years old or something. But I went with my mom to make her happy. And I walk in, and this guy who was like standing at the door, he was like, "Oh, your mom told me that you were moving to Charlotte." He said, "I just want to let you know I've been praying for you, and I know that everything's going to be okay." And from that moment, I like literally for probably an hour, I felt God move in and through me. It broke me open, like all the tears. I was like crying like a little girl on my mom's shoulders. And she's like, why are you crying? I was like, I don't know. And I literally got my stuff. It was packed in a U-Haul. And the day after Christmas, I didn't even stay for New Year's. Like I left. I went and I was like, I need this. I don't know anybody in Charlotte. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm doing it.
I really appreciate that sometimes that rock bottom or that cracking is what does reestablish a spiritual connection, trusting that this is happening for me. Like when we're in the human experience of it, we're victim, it's happening to me. And when we're in the higher perspective, when we're in witness consciousness, when the third eye opens and we start to see, oh, this is happening for me, not to me. So then I can embrace it, even though I'm going into the unknown. If we're leveraging some form of spiritual connection, some higher purpose, it helps explain and justify and give courage to rebuild into the unknown. And I think
Yeah.
that that's where faith comes, that where, whether it's religion, meditation, spirituality, your higher self, angels, whatever, just a connection to a part of you that is connected to the universe that has a bigger plan than just this little 3D mind perception.
Yeah. And I feel like for me, like going back to childhood, where it was like when I'm really young, I turn into this performer. So I set goals for myself, and my goodness, I will achieve them. If I set a goal for myself, I will will myself to do it. But what that is that's only ego consciousness, right?
Right.
That doesn't take into account all of the unknown factors of like, well, if you fail, then what happens? But I never did up until this point. And then I went face to face with the ways in which I failed myself. And that's when it cracked my ego open, and I was able to allow this spiritual divine essence to say, like, we've got you. And then, I would fall back into these patterns of thinking that I was like had control, or I could just like will myself through this. But the thing that I've realized by studying the unconscious is like, that's not how the unconscious works.
Right.
You can't will yourself into the unconscious. The best metaphor I have for that is like the unconscious is like a little baby deer that's trying to come out of the woods, at the edge of the woods. And if you go in with like all will and force and goals and all the thing, it'll just like run back into the forest, and it'll be so hard to find it. So it takes this like really gentle dance with the unconscious. When your ego is cracked, now it's time to just like learn to dance. It's not a forceful experience from there on out. So
Yeah. You mentioned this piece around being cracked open, and this is where the trusting in the universe is just so powerful. And we can have these goals where, like you say, the overcompensator was just like, okay, I'm going to reach this summit, I'm going to hit this goal, and then we reach the goal, but it's empty because it's an ego goal, not a soul goal. So we might reach this level of success, but then the betrayal is to our health. The betrayal is I threw my soul under the bus because I'm doing work that I absolutely loathe. I can't tell you how many clients come through here that are in this place of betrayal around their career because of money or like success or image. Oh, well, my whole family's attorneys, so I need to be an attorney. And this is the lifestyle, so I can't betray my family's expectations of what a provider is. So I can't honor myself. Back to betrayal again. And when we're in that place where we're just reaching summits for the ego's validation, there will be a cost. And a lot of times that's where we see alcohol and depression, or some kind of sedation, some kind of addiction to kind of fill in the gap between what is nourishing our soul and what is nourishing our ego, because that has diminishing returns of like, okay, well, I hit my numbers again, or I reached this goal again, or I'm bigger, I'm faster, I'm more, I'm even more well-known, or I'm more followers, more money. But then what correlates when we're not having a soul alignment is that now there's going to be a depression or anxiety, or it's an empty, hollow victory. And there's this journey of reconciling those so that we're not abandoning ourselves when we're going after our goals. If they are our soul goals, now we're finding a real alignment where we can still have that drive and passion to achieve. And when it's in alignment with our soul's mission or our soul's truth, then there is fulfillment and not just an empty victory.
Yeah.
So,
Been there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, still we're all constantly working out these little unconscious patterns that drive us to make certain choices. Back to you said, "Wow, my choices matter." So it's great to know what thoughts are driving my choices, what beliefs are driving my choices. And
and I think if someone is experiencing depression or anxiety, again, not looking at that as an inherent problem, saying like, what is this trying to teach me?
Yeah.
Like what's underneath this anxiety? Why am I feeling depressed? What's beneath that depression? Because oftentimes depression is just telling us, hey, there's something over here that you're not looking at, you're not orienting to it right, or you haven't surrendered enough of the ego to kind of go into that direction. So
and that might have to do with I have to be successful to be loved or worth. And so that now we go back to more childhood imprints there of just not really. So I have another question. Like, so let's just say, and we'll wrap it up in a little bit. And since we've been talking about clear boundaries and also kind of balancing that feminine and masculine, we're going to give people a discount on both of those courses because I want people to have those tools on clear boundaries and learning how to balance the feminine and masculine. Okay, so my question is, if somebody feels like they're in a situation of betrayal, whether that's in a relationship or whether it's with their health or in a job that they absolutely love, what advice would you have for them to navigate out of that with as much grace as possible?
Honesty. Honesty, like you have to be honest with yourself. Like honesty and forgiveness, I think those two are just non-negotiables.
So if I'm honest with, let's say I'm in a relationship betrayal where I feel like there's a betrayal or there's infidelity. Okay, so for those that are dancing with or have danced with this issue where you feel like there's infidelity in the relationship and you're honest about it, you say, hey, maybe you talk about it, maybe you bring it up. And what happens if there's denial on their part or they gaslight and kind of like, you're ridiculous, you're crazy, what do you and they turn it around and they're trying to manipulate the situation so that it makes you doubt that.
Then you trust the honesty of your intuition in that moment, because I was gaslit and I was like told that my intuition, my experiences were not valid at all, and they were completely valid. And so the conversations were just being brushed aside. And so to have an honest conversation, so if someone's not willing to have an honest conversation with you, that you need to be honest with yourself about that.
Agreed, right? Like the truth is, then I mean, that honesty sounds like they don't have the capacity to be accountable. They don't have the capacity, the other person, to be honest. They don't have the capacity to face it. So of course they're going to lie, betray, be in a place of some kind of deception. And so let's say, okay, I'm honest with the fact that they're lying about the deception. Mm-hmm. And so the next move is what?
I would say be honest about how hard it's going to be. Like, give yourself the truth. Like, hey, I don't know what's coming here. I know I don't know what's coming here. And then trust that you are held and you're okay. And don't abandon yourself in that moment.
Right.
So you really have to have this compassionate perspective of self in those moments, because especially if you're in a situation where someone has manipulated your truth, so you really don't know what reality is, the best thing you could do for yourself is tune in. Like you you, like I said, you know exactly what to do. Your body is so wise. Your psyche is compensating. It's letting you know. It's giving you all this truth. Be honest with yourself and know that you do have the capacity to get through it.
I think that that's where positive self-talk comes in. It's just like, I can do this. I'm strong. I'm capable. Whereas the inner critic would be like, I can't do this. I better just stay. And the courage also to be honest and engage as much positive self-talk. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to be stronger, and start dreaming into the life that you're choosing.
So with my clients, what's interesting about self-talk is that it gets them to a certain level. It works until it doesn't,
Yeah.
because if you have positive self-talk without the connected kind of internal awareness, you're going to feel split, and you're not going to trust yourself. That could be a form of self-betrayal. You're telling your one thing, but not trusting it. So it's like this split. So I would say, if you have this practice of positive self-talk, connect it with your body. You've got to feel it. And you've got to allow not just the positive things to come through, but some of the negative too. And that's where you can get support for. So when you're in the negative experiences that feel new and scary and overwhelming, you have someone to help you through that while you're doing the other side of the thing.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying is positive self-talk backed up by action. Like positive self-talk, I can do it, which also means I'm going to need to take the next step.
I'm going to need to feel this all the way through.
I'm going to need to feel this. I'm going to need the courage to feel it. And I love that you're saying get support, because if you haven't, I wish I would have had support going through my marital liberation. I had actually, one of my sisters was really pivotal in, it was a safe space for me to vent. It was a space, without judgment, for me to be angry, for me to say some very hurtful things, for me to be pissed, sad. And also, when you're going through this process of ending something, whatever it is, whether it's with a substance, a relationship, whether it's work, career, finances, health, whatever, like really grieving what you thought it was going to be. The bigger grief that I needed support with, Danielle, was not, I wasn't really grieving the relationship, at least in my marriage, because we had already grown so far apart at that point. I wasn't really going to be missing that. But what I was grieving was the loss of the family unit, because was really, really hard for me to let go of. But the no was so important as far as not going forward. But I also had to give myself permission to grieve what I thought it was going to be, and also grieve the life that I had wanted for my kids. And most of my rage and sadness and emotions were more about that. And so I needed support there to let, to have, my sister say, it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be pissed. And also, I had somebody else in my corner that was also, and you don't have to stay here. Go rebuild your life. You don't have to. I think there's a level of courage that is discernment of, watch where your attention goes, and don't go stalking them on social media and who are they dating now. And like, you've got to be really, really courageous and disciplined with where you put your attention, because you got a life to rebuild, or you've got a self and like a process to honor. And I've noticed a lot of people lose the momentum and the necessity of building their own life, because they're still stuck in what are they doing, and they're still stuck in the grief, and they're not moving through it, and so they're not rebuilding their life.
That's a really good point. And I think that we inherently have this instinct for self-preservation, right? So if we're constantly putting our attention towards that, and it's making us feel all of these really overwhelming negative emotions, and we can't handle that, we kind of cut off from that experience. And so really, when you're feeling those compulsives, those obsessions, taking ownership of that and saying like, I can feel this way, and not shame yourself for feeling that way, because we have this instinct to want to do it. We're curious humans. And I do not want to shame anyone that's gone and looked at an ex's life, because it's real. It's tough. But choosing to do something else with your body in that moment, act it out in a different way, dance, paint, like go work out, go for a run, do something to let that energy move through your body instead of just dedicating it towards wounds.
Right.
So
and have some boundaries there. Like I have had to block or unfollow just because it's too, it continues to reinforce the wounding when I'm trying to heal. And so I think that it's also important, like when you're in the healing process and you've stepped away and it's been 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, 2 decades, maybe, of just, giving yourself some clear boundaries with that person to say, while I'm healing, while I'm reclaiming myself, it may not be healthy to have communication. It may not be healthy to have a relationship of just friends. You're like, I'm still healing the wounds here. And it may be appropriate to block or just take a break for a short period of time, or maybe, indefinitely, if it's really not in alignment with you supporting yourself from moving forward.
I think there's a lot of shame around that, right?
Yeah,
it's like
sure.
You're perceived as weak if you can't like keep them on your radar, but also move on with your life. And I think it's like and then if they block us, we make it about us, right? Like we are bad. And it's like, no, that has nothing to do with anything. It really is just a boundary. You're saying, I need this for me, period.
And we also need to respect that other people might also have a boundary, that it might not feel good for somebody else to block us, but it might be their way of starting over. They might be totally bypassing, and that's their right. If they're going right into the next relationship, maybe there was an overlap and they're continuing with the person they had the affair with or whatever, that's their right. And I watch so much of my personal energy, but also a lot of my clients spend so much time in their life and what they're doing decades later that it's like, what are you doing over in their zone? So clear boundaries works 2 ways, because it's not for me to go shame what the choices. If they bypass and just go right into the next relationship, they have every right to do that. And like wasting my energy on those thoughts is another betrayal, because now I'm missing the energy and time that I could be investing in my life and my joy and my happiness.
Yeah, that was my experience. And I feel like the thing that kept me from moving that energy and kind of being a little bit like resentful about it was not expressing my anger. Like I was angry and I was just like, felt like I shouldn't be angry. Mm-hmm. And I was like, so learning to work with my anger creatively and like, okay, just imagining what I would do to that person if I could get my hands on him. Not actually doing it, but that's what helps these unconscious drives move. Like it allows the energy to move. So, I've had clients like tell me like, well, tell me what you really think. And I was like, okay, so write that down. And I was like, burn it.
Yeah.
And
get it out. Get it out so it doesn't stay as a poison. Like if it's rage, if it's resentment, if it's sadness, if it's grief, if it's disappointment, it's like move through the emotions and then we can get to the lesson. And then later on, and not initially, can get to forgiveness. That's like the whole process there. I love that in this conversation, we've gone, every single thing seems to go back to self-betrayal of where am I not honoring myself in this experience, or where am I not honoring my emotions about this experience, or my intuition or feelings. So you are just an all-star, rock star, beautiful soul. I know we can be talking forever. And you have your own podcast, which is amazing. the
I
Embodied
do.
podcast, and I'm going to be a guest on that. So be sure to follow both of us so that you can hear both conversations, because we're going to dive into a juicy topic on your show as well. And so tell people where they can find you, sister.
So you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Danielle McGinnis, and my website is drdaniellemcginnis.com. So kept it really easy.
Yes. And if you are still listening, then this has been a valuable conversation. If any part of this has been valuable, please share it with somebody else that you think might benefit. Please, leave a review. Let us know what you thought about this conversation, and want to give you that free gift, that inner child healing, because we talked a lot about, working with not betraying our inner child's emotions. So we're going to give you a free guided visualization to kind of heal the inner child wounds, as well as discounts on clear boundaries, and also the feminine and masculine, because we talked a lot about just honoring that intuition, and also the masculine about being honest and being discerning and taking action. And I'm so grateful for what you're doing. So besides where to find you, what programs and things are you offering to help people bring their unconscious to the conscious? Like how can people work with you?
Yeah, so I have a signature group program called Born to Heal. So it's a 12-week program, and it's inside out healing. So the first 6 weeks of the program is all about facing that unconscious inner world. The middle part of the program is about staying, compassion, acceptance, forgiveness. And then the last part is really about putting yourself out into the outer world. How can we now have good communication skills, boundaries, staying in integrity, truth, and really honoring that truth? So that's my signature group program. I have one-on-one work. And then I just launched a 6-week live workshop series called Coming Home to Body. And it's all about learning how to create a symbolic relationship with your inner world, and how that affects your relationship to your body image, food, and exercise. So something I'm super, super passionate about, coming from my background. I see so many women struggle with this, and it's something that I feel like, again, it needs to have this creative way to work with it. It's not simple and linear. So yes, those are
Awesome.
the things.
Those are fantastic programs. And so go check that out. And thank you for following your intuition, so that you could really bring the best version of you forward. And the work that you're doing, it's so beautiful. It's so meaningful. And I've just watched you grow, and you're so authentic and in your heart and vulnerable. And that's just super rare, and it's needed. So thank you, Danielle, Dr. D, for everything that you are doing, and continue shining, sister. And you know that I'm right here, shoulder to shoulder, walking with you on this journey.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please go to subscribe for more fabulous conversations. We have some incredible chats. If you haven't explored the other episodes, go do that. Please subscribe, share it, leave us a rave review. That really helps. And you can always find me on shamangelichealing.com. You can find me on Instagram at Anahata Ananda, and go to the website to find out upcoming events that are happening, as well as virtual breath work to kind of help clear out density, because we do that. And then I'm also here in Sedona for private sessions. And be sure to go to the show notes for the free gifts and discounts on courses, so that you get the support you need to heal, thrive, and shine. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And thank you, Danielle, for bringing your light out into the world.